Hey, this is Professor Homa. I'm going to review the cruise ship exercise we did in class, and I'll go over it quickly, but just to kind of cover the things that we went over just to keep it fresh in your mind. I'm going to start right from the beginning. I'm going to do File New, just like we did, and use the default size or the default ActionScript version of 3.0, which we're not going to use yet anyway. So we're going to hit OK. We have a default size of 550 by 400, which is why we made a background image the same size. And actually the quality of images, if you make them the same size and not scale them too much, you're going to have better quality of images. So for my background image, I'm going to bring in right now. And notice, before I bring it in, I have a layer 1 right here, and there's a blank keyframe. That means there's no content. But once I import this, there'll be a regular keyframe there. Well, it'll be solid. So let me do that right now. I'm going to file import to stage. You could import it into your library if you're not ready to use it yet. But I'm going to import to stage, and I'm going to bring in cruise ship JPEG, which is probably the best way to save any kind of photographic image. We're going to be using JPEGs and PNGs. If you need any transparency, we'll use a PNG. But for just a flat image, we'll use a JPEG. And here's my background. We're going to use this as a background. And it came in on layer 1, and there's the keyframe now. You can see there's a keyframe where this image came in. I'm going to rename the layer by double-clicking here, and I'm just going to call it Ocean. And that's my ocean layer. And anything that we do on top of this, I'm going to do on separate layers so that we can do tweens that don't interfere with this. Okay? I'm going to make a new layer over here in my layer palette. There's trash, a layer folder if you need to collect a number of images or layers together that basically creates a scenery or something. You may have a layer folder, but I'm just going to make a new layer, individual layer, by clicking that button, the one right here. And I'm going to rename this layer even before I bring my image in, and I'm just going to call it ship. You may use a pirate ship or a cruise ship. Okay, so that's my ship layer. Notice that's a blank keyframe. There's nothing there yet. There's no content. So I'm going to do a file import, and I'm going to bring in my ship. And I'm going to import that to stage as well. Make sure you're on this layer when you import it. If you're on the ocean layer and you import it, it's going to go on your ocean layer, and you're going to have to cut it and then go on the other layer and then repaste it if you have to move it. They don't have a real quick way to move images from one layer to the other. So make sure you're on your ship layer, do a file import, import to stage, and I'm going to bring in my cruise ship.png, and I use the PNG format so that we could have transparency since we silhouetted around the ship so we don't see any background. And I'm going to import that image, and there it is, and it comes to the upper left. I'm just going to move it over, and if I wanted to scale this, I can use this transform or free transform tool, and it'll bring handles around here, and if you grab on a corner and hold shift, you could scale it proportionally. So I'm going to make it a little smaller because I'm going to start off smaller over here, and I'm actually going to put it off the stage because it's going to come off the stage and go across. And I'm going to go back to my selection tool once I'm done. So there's my image. You can see right now it's a bitmap. They call it a bitmap because any kind of JPEG, PNG image that you bring in here, they just call it a bitmap. And one thing we're going to do is we're going to convert this into a symbol so that we could tween with it. Now, the first time I recorded this, I forgot to do it. And then when I did my classic tween, it didn't work correctly. So I started over, but I'll just mention that make sure you do this step. Make sure that you either right-click and do convert to symbol, or you can go up here and go modify convert to symbol, whichever one you choose, but make sure that you select it with your selection tool and go modify convert to symbol. And if you're seeing this big palette here, you could click on basic. You don't have to see that right now. And I'm just going to use a graphic symbol. Eventually we'll use movie clips and buttons, but for right now just a graphic symbol is fine. And I'm just going to name it ship, and I'm going to hit OK. Now it's showing a blue outline now, and it has a little registration mark in the middle, indicating that it's a symbol. It also shows graphic over here, which is a type of symbol, and it shows instance of ship. So when a symbol is on the stage, they consider that an instance, because you could have multiple instances of symbols on the stage. So there's my ship instance right now, and what we're going to do is we're going to animate it, so we're going to make it look like it's moving across by changing its position and changing its size. So I'm going to make this one a little shorter. We did it 10 seconds in class. I'm going to do it 5 seconds, which would be 75 frames. If we're at 15 frames per second, that means this would be 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, every 5 increments here, or 15 frames would be 1 second. So if I went to frame 75, that would be 5 seconds. So I'm going to insert a keyframe here because I'm going to change it on frame 75. So I'm going to insert a keyframe. I could do that by right-clicking, doing insert keyframe, or I could just hit F6 on my keyboard, the F6 key, and it'll make a keyframe. And you can see there's my keyframe up here, and that means typically these gray frames, which are static frames, will repeat whatever the first keyframe has. So, and that's what happened here. Everything's the same. But now that I made a keyframe, it allows me to change this. So whenever you're going to make a change, you should add the keyframe first, then move it. Don't move it first because it'll move it how it is on the first frame. So I made the keyframe, now I'm going to move it. Now the only problem with moving it is I can't see my ocean. The problem is my ocean only exists on frame 1. So on frame 1 it looks fine, except once the playhead starts to move, the ocean disappears because the ocean doesn't know to exist on all the frames yet. To make that happen, just go to frame 75 or wherever the end of your movie is and do an F5 or right-click and do insert frame. So you can do F5 or insert frame here. And the reason we use insert frame instead of keyframe, this is actually a static frame. So whenever you're just using background imagery that isn't going to change at all, just use static frames. Okay, and it's indicated, the end of static frames are indicated by this little white box. That's just an end frame right there. And it's not showing a little pop-up, but that's an end frame. So we have a keyframe, we have an end of static frames, and all these gray ones are static frames. So now that we have this separate keyframe, I'm going to move this over to the other side of my stage, and I'm even going to scale it using my transform tool. I'll make it bigger, and if you go to 40, and I'll hold shift, and I'll just move it off a little bit. So that's where my ship's going to end up, and I'll go back on my selection tool. So it's going to start on the right side, and on frame 75 it's going to move to the left side. Now what Flash is going to do is it's going to do all these in-between frames. It's going to do the transition between these two frames in order to make it look like it's moving. So it'll change both its position and its size that we changed on the last frame. So to do that, I'm just going to right-click anywhere between these two frames and do Create Classic Tween. Classic Tween is the way the old motion tween used to be. And I'm going to select that, and it'll make kind of this lavender color with an arrow. Now if you see any dots in here, it means something's wrong with it. And there is a chapter in the book or a page in your 100 Technique book that has problems that happen. And like I said, I recorded this before and I forgot to make it a symbol first, and I had a problem with it. That's one of the problems, is not making it a symbol before you do classic tween. So make sure you do a symbol first, then make it a classic tween. Okay, now you can see by just moving my playhead, this ship is moving along. Now I'm going to save this. I'll do a file save as, and I'll save this as, and I'll find my folder here. And I actually made a cruise ship folder, and I'll just call it cruise ship. I'll put my last name and keep it .fla. That's the native format in Flash. And I may already have one here, so I'm just going to call it 2, since I'm doing this one for the video. And I'll hit save. That saves my Flash file, and there's the file name right there. That's my native format. Now if I want to see what it looks like in Flash, now I can do this. I can do control play. That just moves the playhead in the Flash environment. But the best way to see these, because some things will not work in the Flash environment, you should do control test movie, and what that does is it actually generates an SWF and shows it playing through the Flash player. And it will loop by default. So there's what it should look like if I put the SWF on the web. There's my SWF file. So you could close this up. So at any point, and what actually happens is when you save this, it'll actually generate another SWF. Here's my second one here, this one here. You can see it generated an SWF just by doing control test movie in the same directory of where my original FLA is. So, at any point you could just do control test movie just to see what it looks like. And you can see that's going pretty fast at 5 seconds. The one we did in class was like 10 seconds, so that took a little bit, that went a little slower, is a little more realistic. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and then I'll show going over putting in a sound. So just to review, classic tween in here, make sure you make it a symbol first, make sure you add a keyframe then, and then do the classic tween.